Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Institute of China Studies, let me welcome you all to the ICS Wednesday seminar. In today's panel discussion, we will be discussing dual circulation strategy, causes and progress. To speak on the subject today, we are being joined by Avinash Anil Godbole, Assistant Professor and Assistant Academic Dean at JSLH, Jindal Global University. He is a visiting faculty at the Naval War College, Goa, since June 2020 and SIRSS, as well as Mumbai University since January 2022. The session will be chaired by Santosh Pai. He is an honorary fellow at ICS. He has been offering legal services to clients in the India-China corridor since 2010. He is currently a partner at the Link Legal, an Indian law firm. He also teaches courses on India-China business at IIM Shillong. He's a member of CII's core group on China. Before I invite the chair to begin the proceedings, let me lay down the housekeeping rules. All participants, except for the speaker, shall be muted for the entire duration of the event. Participants are requested to send in their questions via the chat box or use the raise hand option. Please unmute yourself only when called upon to do so by the chair. I will now invite the chair to begin the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Surabhi, and welcome, Dr. Godbole. Thank you for agreeing to join us today at this week's Wednesday seminar series. As you all are familiar, every week we try to examine topics which are topical in the news. Dual circulation has been now in the news, at least in its recent avatar, for 2 years. We all still remember when we were in lockdown during May 2020, dual circulation was suddenly resurrected. Many of us were wondering, is this a response to COVID? Is this an economic response? Is this a foreign policy? Is there an angle to it? Or is this just domestic politics? 2 years down the line, I'm not sure whether we have clear answers, but Dr. Godbole has been working on this theme, and he has gone back into history to see if this was an entirely new concept. With his international relations background, he'll give us a flavor of what are the external and internal drivers for China resurrecting this dual circulation policy. And lastly, before we conclude, perhaps we will also have time to look into the future and what this means for global supply chains, for China's position in the global economy, and so on. So, Dr. Godbole, I'll now request you to offer your comments for about 20 to 25 minutes. And after that, I will take questions, or I will pose a few questions of my own. And let's hope to have a very interesting discussion. And we are all keen to learn more about your ongoing research in this area. So please feel free to share as much as you can, although I know it's still a work in progress. Thank you, and Dr. Godbole, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Santosh. Let me start sharing the screen. Let me know when it's visible. And is it visible fully now?
Yes, Avinash.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Okay, so I have been working on the dual circulation strategy project as part of the China-India Visiting Scholarship at Ashoka University. And I'm also teaching at JGU concurrently. And one of the reasons to look at this topic was actually to push myself out of my comfort zone of looking at politics and foreign policy and minority and environment, which have been my comfort zones now, having read and written on these for the last 12, 13 years. And as I come here and speak in front of you, I realize I've pushed myself out of the comfort zone a lot. So one of the ideas of doing this seminar today was to do an open house on the topic, do a kind of brainstorming with all the experts, and just share my primary thinking and ideas on the topic. So let's get into it. So it's still a work in progress. Like I mentioned, it's part of the fellowship. And I thank Ashoka University for giving me the fellowship, and for my own university for supporting me throughout. Actually, I'm just teaching one course. It's a luxury in a university to be able to teach one course, because you have a research and writing commitments. So my university is also supporting me quite well. Ashoka University's support staff has been doing a great job for this. Dr. Arvind, whom we all know, is my mentor, and Dr. Saratung is my collaborator, whom I meet, both of whom I meet regularly, share my questions and ideas as such. Again, thank you ICS, Mr. Kanta, and everyone else for giving me this platform to discuss this primary work in progress, obviously. Like I mentioned, I really intend this to be open house work. This is the time in which I have been reading, and next 3 months, April, May, and June, is really when I'm going to be starting to write. So this is a good time for me to get this feedback from you all on whether I'm on the right track, or what to do next, and what are the points that I'm missing. Since I mentioned it, I'm out of the comfort zone. I'm not an economist, so this is not an economic project. This is not a data-based project either. And right now, even the presentation does not have a lot of data, but I get to add it, or I hope to add it when I get to writing the report eventually. So the nature of output is going to be one working paper for Ashoka University, and hopefully one or maybe more outcomes out of this, maybe a journal paper or something like that. Based on this work, I already wrote a short op-ed last October on the housing crisis unfolding in China and its impact, and how it links with what China is thinking on that. I should have linked it here, but it was published in Hindu in late October. So it has helped me expand and focus on those areas as well. So let's get into this. So this is the structure of my presentation. What are the drivers of the policy, including external and internal drivers? How does the policy is actually a continuity, and in that sense, it's not a something new. This is something that continues from harmonious society, and the one of the points that Vanchiapo at one point had mentioned of 6 imbalances in either Hujinto or Vanchiapo, I keep missing that. Of the 6 imbalances, for example, the imbalance between coastal and the interior, between cities and towns and villages, between rich and poor, between on the environmental imbalance as well, and so on. So those 6 imbalances also reflect in the policy that has changed. What does it represent for the party as an ideology, as a political strategy? Then this is part of my next research. How are the provinces responding to it, and what is the driver for those provinces or constraints, that is, for the provinces to respond, and how is it likely to shape in the future? Of course, not doing a lot of prediction here, but again, trying to put out some points. And I'll just share some of the sources, some of the significant points or readings that I have focused on in the last couple of months for this presentation, or until this point. So external drivers, absolutely clear. US-China trade war since mid-2018. We all know the timeline and the taxes, the slowing down of trade, commitments of invest bilaterally, and so on. There have been at least 5 white papers. I just ran through the list in the morning on this since 2018, how China has been trading in a fair way, how it is committed to globalization, and so on. So you can see that concern. China fears that deglobalization and protectionism are not short-term things, but something that's going to continue for a long time, at least for several years. And they are aware, it is reflected now in several think tank writings as well, that the Trump era is not an exception, but there's a greater realization in the American thinking that China is not going to become a normal power, that it was a mistake to expect China to be part of the rules-based order under the American umbrella. Obviously, a realist would say that it was always a foolish imagination. Also, the present Russian invasion of Ukraine and the European response and the American response would also mean that this is my belief now that China thinks that so far Europe's strategy on China was different from the American strategy. The way there was warming up of Belt and Road, and especially Germany and earlier UK. I believe with after this war/invasion, Europe will also continue to take harder stands on China economically, or maybe forced. And some of that reflection is being done in the Chinese web writings, media writings, that European approach to China will change. We've already seen European countries getting active on Indo-Pacific. So China is aware that there's this bipartisan agreement in Washington about the status of China and the role of trade that has played so far. And the State of the Union address by President Biden reflects that. So external circulation is no longer a sustainable engine of growth. It's going to play an important part for years to come, but that is not going to be the place where you can rely on. So that realization begins in the mid 2016, 2017. And my perception is that before COVID, why this was announced, one of the questions that Santosh had posed to me earlier on why this was announced when it was announced, it was obviously COVID was the background to the timing, but it was also obviously China will get blamed for COVID and the way COVID spread and what China did not do in the early weeks and months. But it did anticipate more backlash on COVID and more potential restrictions in the long term, and also maybe anticipated President Trump to get the second presidency, and that's why how the strategy was announced. So from this external driver's perspective, this is a kind of a defensive strategy in cricketing terms, a back foot play, if you will. From the domestic perspective, it is a proactive strategy. Wan Jiabo in his last speech in the NPC had given this quote, made the statement that China's growth, sorry, I should have put the full quote here, but four operating terms: unsteady, unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. So if you break down each of these words, the dual circulation strategy and everything else that has happened before and after that tries to address this challenges, all of these four challenges. On the point of unsteady, trying to get domestic supply chains in more vibrant and more active. On unbalanced, trying to increase domestic consumption. On the point of uncoordinated, there's a response that there's a need for the internal opening of markets. The local protectionism is something that still hurts China's economy. And one of the points that you will see as a highlight of the 14th five-year plan I've mentioned of creating national brands in China for local consumption. And unsustainable, again, inequality between rich and poor, and basically trying to manage capitalism better as such. So it has these drivers. As early as 2005, there were a couple of academic papers, and in 2010, there was a much detailed research report of a think tank which focused on, or which was called Greater Domestic Circulation, meaning the need to focus on domestic market and domestic economy principally. So that is also one of the significant drivers. And in 2017, we all saw at the party Congress, this new principal contradiction was highlighted by Xi Jinping in his speech. The principal challenge facing Chinese society has evolved into one between unbalanced and inadequate development and people's growing needs for a better life. And Xi Jinping picks up this point in his speeches, longer speeches, when dual circulation was announced. There's one more point that I can add here after this point is that China will not grow faster, but it will grow better qualitatively. That is also one of the highlights that has been repeated on several occasions in the last 2 years, at least since this point was highlighted. So it's kind of responding to accepting slower economic growth, but trying to focus on qualitative growth at the same time. This last point, we cannot allow the gap between the rich and the poor to continue growing, for the poor to keep getting poorer, with the rich continue to growing richer, was highlighted in Xi Jinping's statement announcing dual circulation strategy, but also it came in common prosperity. The speech that he gave last August, I believe, in one of the major conferences. So these are some of the drivers. Of course, there are a lot more, but these are some of the principal structural drivers. The need to rebalance economy, the need to create domestic brands that are sustainable, that are as trusted as the international brands, and as well consumed in China as well as abroad. That is also one of the necessities. Several reports indicate by 2025, China is going to be the principal market for luxury consumption as well. But do Chinese luxury buyers buy Chinese brands? That is also one of the concerns. Before COVID and before the slowdown, the major tourism destinations for Chinese rich tourists used to be Singapore and Australia, and for the even richer ones in Europe to do luxury shopping. And because of COVID, that is happening domestically now. But again, the imports of luxury brands made outside China has increased. That is the data from 2020 and first part of 2021 that I had seen. So the necessity to create domestic luxury brands for diamonds and even for the luxury bags and the clothings and household items, that is a concern actually. And that is also a strategy to tap into that market that's going to unveil, that's going to become the biggest one in the world by 2025. Dual circulation is not a standalone policy as such. Made in China 2025 came before a couple of years of dual circulation. And my perception is that dual circulation was announced the way it was announced again as a response to criticism that Made in China 2025 received. Almost all the countries, all the major trading partners, all the technology partners have responded negatively to Made in China 2025, as if the supply chain are going to break shortly, and with negative consequences for technology as well as critical technology issues. Then came the dual circulation plan, then the 14th five-year plan. I'll highlight how dual circulation fits into the 14th five-year plan. It will come in the picture. It will become slightly clearer after that. Then the science and technology policy, one of the major speeches that Xi Jinping made in 2014. And this is the most recent highlight on this, the need for indigenous innovation. And I have tracked some of Xi Jinping's, tracked this for last year and a half on how often Xi Jinping has spoken on this. And to my knowledge, this has been at least one speech every 2 months that is linked to science and technology policy with a stress on indigenous innovation or domestic innovation strategy, and that becoming a bigger part of supply chains as well. So it links with the 14th five-year plan strategy as well. It's a continuity. And then the common prosperity. Common prosperity is also a wish list. It's not a time-bound goal, and it has its own contradictions as well. I'll highlight that eventually in this discussion. So I just ran through the section on the 14th five-year plan and looked at how dual circulation finds mention there. This is less than 1/3 of what is there in the 14th five-year plan document, the English version. And I've highlighted these points that some of them I have already mentioned. So high quality consumer goods, medium and high-end products and services in education, medical care and elderly care. Again, addressing the aging society concerns, elderly care, and traveling children out of town for their jobs and education as well. That is one of the highlights of the 14th Five-Year Plan. Accelerating the marketization of comparative links in naturally monopolistic industries. Put in more complicated terms, but again, local protectionism, and how to get the provinces to get out of that, how to get them to reduce some of the local subsidies or use them in a better way than using it for taxing out of state, out of province products, or something of that nature. And on local protectionism, there is continuous research and evidence that it is a problem that that the central government has faced throughout the last 20 or 25 years. And again, it is hoped that 14th Five-Year Plan works more strongly on this, or on breaking some of these barriers. Benchmarking and quality systems for a better quality of products, upgrading of standards, and getting the domestic standards closer to international standards. Again, third time the highlight on China's domestic brands. There's a special program on making bigger Chinese brands, and that brand-driven strategy as such. On the last point, it's self-explanatory: steady and healthy development of the real estate market, and real estate market to be promoted as a balanced development strategy and a real economy, meaning that real estate right now is a speculative economy, too expensive, and too many people or corporations investing in properties and houses they don't need, and the people who need houses in the cities, they can't really buy. That problem remains. So Evergrande kind of a monster is too big to fail, but you need to not create another one of that nature, and move towards that direction in a more sustainable, coordinated manner. At a larger level, what does dual circulation represent? This is the point on which I'm reading and hope to write a little more, and that is reflected in some of the socio-political writings on political thinking, social thinking for several years now. The social contract is obviously constantly evolving, but the rationality of the party's relations with the people is changing. What do you do with capitalism? How do you control it, or how do you control it? How do you address the question of inequality? And this point of the necessity to regulate the chaotic expansion of capital is something that we have seen in a common prosperity speech, but again in the previous speeches as well. So how do you address the question of unrestrained capitalism, and how is restrained capitalism going to work? So based on these statements so far, there's the evidence that everyone knows what is the problem is, and it's just getting debated on let's find better ways to address this issue. But how is the contradiction of profit and innovation going to work? How do you expect the same corporation to control its profit, control its desire to seek more profit, but invest little more on research and development, innovation, or like social commitments, or CSR, CSR with Chinese characteristics, as we have seen in last 2 or 2.5 years. So that contradiction is what is being worked on right now, and all these statements reflect a kind of a statement of a problem so far, and a kind of a internal debate on what to do. At least let's start talking about it before we come to a better management strategy for these problems. How do you avoid the middle income and middle status trap? Middle income economically and middle status politically, because we know the aspirations of the party, obviously. And in the third, in the historic resolution of last year, we have seen that Xi Jinping's desire to leave an impact for the third 30-year period after Mao and Deng Xiaoping. So it also has that implication as such. So dual circulation represents not on its own, but taken together with common prosperity and everything else, a need for changing the economic structure, a need to vitalize domestic leg of China's economy a little more. It has been done systematically. So domestic investments and consumption grew before the Beijing Olympics with the investments in cities and local infrastructure and local brands and so on. But again, there's a slowdown of that process, especially in the COVID and post-COVID times. The Chinese consumer is not spending much. So I saw an article which says that on Chinese social media, there are groups that encourage people or encourage each other, in which people encourage each other, like Facebook groups, for example, to how to save your money better or how to manage your money better, how to get rid of your card dependence, and how to save money to be able to buying a better health support, or how to be able to send more money to your parents. So the thrifty consumer, I'll share the link later if someone is interested. But thrifty consumer worries the Chinese Communist Party. I think something of this nature is the title, but it's quite an interesting article. So it all adds up, the consumption and the strategy to encourage people to spend their money. But how do you encourage a middle class if it's getting more thrifty at this point of time? Again, that is a contradiction. How will the state, where will the state spend more, and how will it assure the people that their future and their retirements is better taken care of, and they can afford to spend little more for making dual circulation work? These are the questions that I'm going to be working on next. How is the party and the government communicating dual circulation with the masses as such? That is the next work. Again, dual circulation is not a target or a goal or there's no timeline as such. It's a kind of a wish list, what should happen. And it's left to domestic interpretations, and implementations are left to ministries and provinces to decide. So it's again crossing the river by filling the stones, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that is how the responses are being seen. How have the provinces responded to it? There have been 3 types of provinces and 3 types of responses. From my limited, again, I'll confess that on this point I have worked lesser than the causes part. So I'll be happy to take inputs from all of you on this. If my categorization is useful, accurate, or whatever, or not working in that sense. So 3 types of responses based on the proximity of the provincial leadership to to Xi Jinping or to the standing committee. So on both the occasions, on dual circulation and common prosperity, Zhejiang was the province that came out with their own provincial response document within 2 weeks. Guangdong came with the provinces, I think, within 2 months. So these are the provinces that have to benefit in terms of in terms of political proximity, or in terms of economy, or provinces that are and provinces that have some sort of uncertainty have responded in a different manner. So richer provinces and politically closer provinces have who have concerns with supply chain stability and expansion of domestic business have been enthusiastic. Provinces which have to get over their local protectionism have given kind of cold response, and provinces which don't know where the money is going to come from. So Shaanxi like provinces or Xinjiang, there has been not really much statement, for example, on the strategy. They don't know if they have to spend more money on this, or they're going to get more financial resource to plan on dual circulation and common prosperity strategies in the days to come. Responded to so far on this. This is my limited presentation, but I'm just going to highlight what I have been reading on this. This was one of the speeches, primary long speech on this. This is fairly long, one of the longest texts on this subject and quite useful. Common prosperity, again, quite fantastic speech, but again, complicated. And like usual, in this one, there's a lot to read between the lines. What is not said is also important. So I'm sure everyone is going to read and interpret this differently. But again, this is worth reading on what it means for China's perceptions, self-perceptions, and its own political and ideological thinking. So again, I didn't highlight this before, but to expand my reading on China's politics and also trying to read something on the move towards the next party congress. My working on this began as part of trying to read on the next party congress or trying to make some sense of it beforehand. So that's how I came to read this. And some more readings on this. Yuan Ang's work, we all know her book, China's Gilded Ages, is quite good again. But this speech particularly is quite simple. One can read the long, this text of Xi Jinping, read this interpretation by Yuan Ang once. It's quite simple and quite to the point, and then go back to reading the original text again if you have that energy or interest remaining, that is. This is one fantastic book from last year, Voices from the Chinese Century, and I have benefited immensely from it. It's quite good on these speeches. Most of the speeches have been published separately, but this is a nice collected volume on China's perceptions and self-perception and those political and social debates on what to do next and parties' relations with the people, etc. Expectations from all the diverse groups are highlighted here in this speech, in this book. So I have read almost 2/3 of this book and really recommend this for everyone who wants to do a little more of reading on this. Fateful Decisions, again, covers a lot of diverse topics. One of the more recent books, I mean, almost 2 years now, but still good book on politics, economy, foreign policy, society, minorities, and so on. So can get your hands onto this. And evolutionary governance in China, something we know that does happen in China, how certain policies get tried out, either in certain provinces or in certain municipalities, and then they filter into national policies. So this book does talk of the state-society relations. So anyone interested for looking at this topic can look at this. And yeah, I think that's that. That is my presentation. I can stop here and
Thank you, Avinash.
Sharing my screen.
Thank you. You've been very generous. You have shared with us what you're thinking, what you're planning to write about, and also what you have read so far. So that is extremely illuminating. I'll just take this opportunity to ask a couple of provocative questions. You can address those questions, and then I'll move on to the audience. So my first question is, given your international relations background, and maybe conspicuously, I found BRI missing in your remarks, is dual circulation an admission that BRI has also failed, like your Making China 2025, which has experienced headwinds? Because BRI was understood as a way for Chinese capital to flow out and go into various other countries and economies. But we are now in the third year consecutively where BRI statistics are coming down. The amount of loans given, the amount of investment made, they're going down. So is this meaning that the Belt and Road will still exist, but other countries have to come to China using the Belt and Road because the Chinese economy is now going to be a much more attractive proposition rather than Chinese capital going abroad? So this is my first question. The second question is more inward looking. Is the failure of Evergrande and I think 3 or 4 failures of Chinese banks, is that a gentle nudge to the Chinese consumers to say reduce your savings and spend more because otherwise the 2-child or 3-child policy is not going to work? So are they trying to show that property companies will fail, banks will fail? Because none of these happened earlier. 10 years ago, a Chinese bank failure was unimaginable, and property companies always had problems, but they never came out in the public domain. So domestically, is this dual circulation also a way to encourage people to spend to avoid the middle income trap, as you said, or to actually, because if you look at it as a 2 wheels, the domestic wheel of China is quite small compared to the external wheel, which is quite large. So your sort of observation on both of these, BRI and the local consumption.
Should I answer your questions first and then take
Sure,
questions?
sure.
Okay. I have actually not studied the BRI link, Santosh, but I will in the future. But as you were saying that this looks quite plausible, that the money moving abroad is not working. There's resistance on the interest loans interest issues, and Chinese workers and white elephants creations everywhere. So yeah, that looks definitely a necessary connection. I'll look at that. My perception on Evergrande was similar to like what you said, that Evergrande crisis didn't happen in September last year. It actually was unleashed in December of 2020 with the new tightening of regulation, debt to regulation ratio. And that debt to loan ratio was a known factor for several years. So my perception is that Evergrande was let fail. I mean, if it was to be saved, it would have been saved. There's also a connection of whether Evergrande was let fail because it was linked to Jiang Zemin's political group, which had more control. Apparently, again, this may be too speculative to say, but it's not my perception. But I have read at least 3 or 4 pieces that Jiang Zemin group has linked control on the banks that lend to Evergrande like companies. So it was let fail despite knowing that it will have ripple impact on investment and public perception on the credibility of such corporations. But so that may be one of the reasons, political, but again, and also economic based, that people need to be more circumspect on how they use their money, on how much they spend on their housing dream as such, and who can buy the house. Yeah, the encouragement to spend is always there. I mean, it was part of the couple of previous 5-year plans as well. But why it has not worked? And clearly the mentions recently of dual circulation is in reference to the external circulation not being the support system. So now there's an urgency and inevitability attached to the internal circulation and consumption. So there are a lot of contradictory targets that the government, the banks, people, local governments, think tanks have to chase actually. Actually, interestingly enough, I should have added this in my presentation. I reached out to 5 or 6 economists in China after getting their contacts and references from colleagues. 2 responded, 4 did not respond, and 2 said that despite they themselves being economists, dual circulation has not reflected in what they have read or written anything in any way in the last year and a half. So you can imagine, I mean, so yeah, they're both in the national central government funded think tanks. So yeah, that's that.
Okay, thank you, Avinash. I'll just take the first question from the chat box. In the meantime, I encourage people to raise their hands virtually. Yes, General Narasimhan, maybe you can go first, sir. I'll go to Hemant's question in the chat box later. General, I think your microphone is on mute.
Yeah, now I unmuted myself. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Avinash, for that excellent presentation. I have a few ideas. Just I want to throw it to you so that you can further elaborate or look into it. One is this dual circulation strategy is actually going counter to the globalization which Xi Jinping has been propagating. On one hand, you say I'm going to be dependent on globalization. On the other hand, you say that I'll have to increase the internal circulation. So these are not actually going hand in hand. So it's something that we need to be looking into. That is one. Second thing, you talked about Chinese brands. Some time ago, there was an article which I read that Starbucks is actually losing its value in China because people are looking for a Chinese equivalent of that particular coffee. So there are writings which are there which say that people are going to prefer the Chinese brands than the external brands. That is the second point. Third is on the export reduction that you were talking about. If you look at the trade figures, I mean export figures for quite some time now, from 40% of the trade figures, it has come down to less than 20% in the last few years. So there was an effort basically to reduce the export-oriented economy over a period of time, even before the dual circulation strategy came into existence. So that realization was there. It has got accentuated by the disruption of supply chains, basically because of the COVID and other things. What happened? January, February of 20, China was totally closed, and so the supply chain got disrupted outward. And when China came back online, the other countries went into lockdown. So there was a disruption of a supply and demand chain, which was actually speeding up this process of dual circulation. The technology denial regime is another one which also forced Xi Jinping to start looking at things internally. And that is also subscribing to the viewpoint which you expressed on innovation, which Xi Jinping was talking about. So basic aim is to increase the domestic content of this total economy is something that we need to be looking at. The dual circulation did not figure very well in the China's economy work report in the December 2021, when they came out with the annual China economy work report. That didn't figure very, very prominently in the, I don't think it even figured in the entire paper. Made in China 2025, though there has been no major kind of a writing or major kind of exponential exposition from China, but what they have been doing is to do it quietly internally, because Made in China 2025 raised a lot of feathers outward. They didn't want that the attention towards this. So what they are doing is they are quietly doing things within China, not raising too many hackles about it. That is something we need to look a little more closely. We will get more inputs on this. Property companies and Evergrande. This you need to look at it in conjunction with the other companies which are targeted, right? Starting from Jack Ma's company to Titi Choosing to Tencent to the insurance companies to a whole lot of other things like education companies, gaming companies, internet restrictions, all those things you need to be putting into together. This Evergrande thing was actually China, though people feel that there was a bubble which burst there, Chinese government has actually come to bail out the Evergrande in some form. They've sought more time, they have given them more kind of options. Don't only look at Evergrande, please look at the other 10 companies which are also defaulting. So this is something that is a larger effort to deleverage the real estate sector than of any other issue that we need to be looking into. These are the points I had. And common prosperity and dual circulation again are two different things. Common prosperity was something which was actually done with a view to have income distribution than income accumulation. Wealth accumulation, it was translated into wealth distribution is something which common prosperity is looking. Whereas the dual circulation is looking at a different thing. So I don't think we need to differentiate this a little bit. That will work out better. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Thank you, General Narasimhan. Avinash, would you like to react to all of them before I take questions?
No, all of the points are actually useful, and I'll take them on board. Yeah. So I don't think, to my knowledge, there's still China is still China needs globalization actually. So this contradiction between globalization and dual circulation is not there as such in their reading. But I also think that the balancing of that in the better balancing of external markets and domestic markets is the thing. On the point of common prosperity, yes, that's more like a broad objective, but income distribution is something I have not seen actually. So, sorry, on the mute.
Wealth distribution, wealth accumulation was the earlier strategy.
Yeah.
That's because of common prosperity. What they are looking at probably is a wealth distribution towards weaker sections. That is the principle.
Yeah. So no, sir, that's also not going to happen. It's not. It's not. I mean, from the speech, let me highlight a quote that people will prosper together, and not just a small minority. It's not a call for egalitarianism, and nor will the party fall into the trap of welfareism that rewards the lazy. So the redistribution part is still not there in my reading of the common prosperity. But common prosperity is more like a objective, and dual circulation is the method, and it's left up to everyone to interpret it according to their capacity, their needs, and their motivation as well. So I agree that there's a distinction, but yeah, common prosperity is kind of more of an objective, and dual circulation is going to be a method. That's how I read it, but it's a continuity of the strategy. That's how I highlighted both actually. Yeah. The rest of the points are valid, sir, and thank you for highlighting that. I'll add all these points when I write actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Avinash. Now I'll move to Professor Hemant Adlakar's question in the chat box. His question is, you view dual circulation and common prosperity as CPC's economic strategy or political strategy? That's the first question. And he supplements it by saying, because Xi Jinping has, as you also mentioned, been repeating the importance of the two concepts, but in order to consolidate the party's foundation for holding power over the long term? Question mark. So how do you view it, Avinash? Maybe you can reflect on that.
It's definitely a strategy with the political goals in mind of trying to have the legitimacy question gets debated often outside. What makes the Chinese Communist Party and its single party rule legitimate? Why do people continue to support the party? And party thinks of it more often than we think of it, definitely. And that's how they have survived, as we have seen in the debate on the party centenary as well. So it's a political strategy with economic incentives, creation of economic incentives, and creation of economic opportunities, getting more people involved in the production cycles, getting more domestic innovations, and getting more of domestic innovation in the products that China is going to export. The lowest point on why this has started was, I think, I mean, we always take this example, but the suicide issues in the Foxconn that we saw, I think, was one of the tipping points, seen as the point of employment and progress, but also the space where exploitation and brazen breaking of rules and norms on labor management relations was happening. So that was the low point. And everything else that has happened, or these strategies that have been highlighted, are kind of a response to the people that cannot continue. But the reasons that happened are also structural, and is going to take a long-term structural policy and interventions at several levels: motivations, demotivations, rewards and punishments, to get out of that cycle. So it's definitely a political strategy with economic goals and incentives, and it links with parties' relation with the people, the social contract. The new principal contradiction reflects that social contract, and rest of it are the methods to get to that social contract. Actually, learning by doing things. Actually, that's why we see some provinces being more motivated and some ministries being more motivated than the others.
I don't see any more. Okay, Professor Adlaka has one more question. I think maybe a follow-on question. Yes, please, Hema.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry I'm not putting on my video because that impacts my connectivity. So my supplementary question, not directly related to the dual circulation strategy, but I was just wondering, because you also acknowledged that it is more like a political strategy, etc., with economic incentives. So I was wondering that is it part of ongoing factionalism in the party, or there is something between the premier and the president, because we had seen earlier during Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao's that towards the end of their term, Wen Jiabao had become very controversial in making some statements which were contradictory to what Hu Jintao, especially on the democratic reforms, etc., etc. And now we see again, earlier, Li Keqiang had created a controversy contradicting Xi Jinping directly when he had said that there are 600 million Chinese who are below or up, just above the poverty line.
Mm.
And now, after the end of 2 sessions, he's again made a very controversial statement which questions. You also mentioned that in China, most economists are not sure whether these strategies are actually working out well or being implemented or not. So Li Keqiang has again raised this point that there are millions of Chinese who are waiting for jobs. And what he was implying was that they don't know where to get these jobs for these millions of Chinese. So what do you make of it? I mean,
yeah, I mean, factionalism in context of dual circulation, I have not looked, but yeah, but there's no evidence of someone opposing it in a major way. But yeah, I mean, I have actually not studied the 2 sessions as closely as Professor Hemant you have mentioned, so I don't have a longer answer on this actually recently. But I'll add these points in the writing when I do.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions in the chat box or hand? Ambassador Nambiar, I see your hand. Please.
I'll unmute. No, just this question about this relationship between common prosperity and dual circulation. About a little more than a year ago, there was a fair amount of coverage of this public, this kind of sentiment among the youth, particularly of opting out of the rat race, lying flat, this so-called involution, things like that. What is the situation now? I don't know whether he knows. And how is that, in a sense, is that just one of the side effects of this thing which caused him to talk about common prosperity? Or is it really something which is a fairly serious pathology in this growing community, in this growing sort of development among the youth, particularly in this strong emphasis on capitalism?
I have not tracked the media actually, so rather than give a wrong answer, yeah, General
Narasimhan wants to come in here. Yes, please.
Sir, on the point of Ambassador Vijay Nambiar's question on Tangping, Neichuan, and the other issues, there has been some amount of opposition by the youth, basically contesting the kind of competition that they have to face these days. So these are the issues that have actually forced them to take that particular aspect of, let me lie low. There are a lot of things which are there available on the net if you go through this on this particular issue. But how much it has how much it has gathered speed, only one indication is there of even Xi Jinping and the Communist Party saying that this is deplorable. in one of their statements that they have made this. So which implies that there is some kind of seriousness that is there as allotted to this particular thing, even by the Communist Party and the leadership. That gives an indication probably there is some kind of seriousness in this particular issue that we need to look at. But if you are looking at, is it going to disrupt anything in the future, etc., that I find is not there in the dialogue anywhere in China or otherwise. So the issue is there, but it has not gathered that critical momentum which is required to actually create some kind of a social unrest, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Okay. Avinash, maybe I'll come in with a couple of more questions here. So when COVID was seen to be giving a fillip to digitization, this was also the time when the Communist Party decided to launch its digital currency. Now, how does that tie into dual circulation is that in the last 10, 15 years, when they tried to internationalize RMB, they failed because not many countries were willing to trade in the RMB. But domestically, they don't have these kind of constraints. So throughout 2020 and 21, we saw pilot projects of the digital RMB, which was propelled by this encouragement to spend more. So when you mentioned your, provincial sort of variation, do you see a similarity in this also? Because Zhejiang and Guangdong are some of the most outward-looking provinces of China, heavily dependent on external trade. Have they also taken a lead in popularizing, digital RMB and local consumption, by giving out subsidies and so on? Do you see a sort of syncing between, this provincial variation?
I have actually not followed the digital RMB bit also in the detail, but yeah, it does look interesting from the questions that you've raised that it can be parallel in terms of the place where middle class and its impact on consumption. So yeah, I'll add this to the things that I'm reading on.
Yeah, because the other way to put it is, as General Narasimhan was saying, the party was trying to see how it can benefit from digitization. Now, what was growing due to digitization was online education and so on, which obviously the party doesn't like. But what the party definitely likes is digitization of the RMB. So I think dual circulation, might help the party to achieve those goals as well, to benefit from COVID in some manner. I think because to marshal its sort of political fortunes on a larger trend is somewhat attractive. I'll now leave it there and go to Avik Sen, who has raised his hand. Avik, can you please ask your question?
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, very much. Please proceed.
So this might be a little off topic, but I just wanted to ask one thing. Saudi Aramco has proposed to trade with China in RMB, and Russia's trade with China is also expected to shift to RMB. So, what kind of an impact is it going to take?
I think Santosh, you're better off answering this than me.
Okay, so Avik, maybe General Narasimhan has some inputs. I'll invite him to address.
This RMB and the trade in swapping currencies and trade has been on with China for a pretty long time. It is not new. The only thing is what is happening is because of the sanctions that are actually coming up on Russia and others, you find there is a traction towards this to to trade between local currencies. Like for example, even today you would have read in the paper that we are also thinking of rupee-ruble exchange for oil imports from Russia. So basically what it helps is in actually doing two things. Starting from 2008 onward, there has been an effort by China to actually diversify from dollar over a period of time. You find that there are almost about 30 odd countries which have already agreed on the currency swap agreements with China. So that aspect is increasing. Till today, if you look at it, yuan trade in the world trade aspect, it is about 2.5% as of today. But as and when these swap agreements keep increasing, you will find an increasing usage of yuan. So that is one point. Second point is this is also connected to what Santosh asked about the digital currency. The digital currency, the digitalization of the yuan was started initially within the country in China, basically with a view to do two things. One, increasing the digital payments within the country. Second, also to reduce the shadow banking in China. Shadow banking in China was almost to the tune of $3 trillion plus. If you want to make these transactions more transparent, you need to bring them on the digitization mode. So the DCEP came into place with all this in mind. The second part of the DCEP implementation is basically to internationalize the yuan. The internationalization of the yuan started with Hong Kong first. Now it will again get expanded further. So these are all actually ways and means of diversification away from the dollar trade. And the sanctions, if at all they are imposed, they are going to affect the dollar trade. So this is also one way of overcoming the sanction that could come up. So you will find this kind of a variation taking place depending on the kind of happenings in the international market.
Thank you, General Narasimhan, for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much,
I
sir.
would also maybe supplement what Avik was pointing out. There are also reports that related to the Russia-Ukraine crisis that Chinese companies are on the lookout for opportunities in these markets. Apart from denoting all the trade in RMB or rubles, there are also, maybe, other ways to play this crisis. Maybe promoting Chinese companies to pick up assets which are being divested by other Western companies. So if a Western company is going to sell everything in a fire sale at a very cheap valuation, Chinese companies are now looking at grabbing those assets, which will also indirectly strengthen, the economic linkages between Russia and China, and also, help them to do more business in RMB and so on. So that is just one related point. Now we still have about 10-15 minutes. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll be coming back to Dr. Godbole and asking him to summarize and maybe tell us what are the other thoughts he's planning to pursue in research for the next few months. Go ahead, Avinash.
Okay. So obviously the sources and getting a little deeper into what is the response is one way. So the reasons for dual circulation and common prosperity will be one of the working papers that I'll develop. The second is the responses from provinces and the categories. I'll again think a little more on it and develop work on those categories and maybe turn that into a research report. I'm also looking something on, again, that's an underdeveloped concept, but something in which I'm interested in working on, how the outsiders have responded, the external actors. And I'm trying to get some more interviews going for them. So again, would be useful if you could, all of you could suggest me names for speaking on this. So external responses from Asia and from Europe, actually. I was looking at, so there has been stronger reaction, at least from reactions from think tanks and academia on both of these dual circulation and common prosperity. I've seen think tank reports or research reports in UK, Germany, and France on this, which highlight this as a short-term opportunity and a long-term challenge. So getting little, hopefully, if I can turn that into a paper as well, external responses, and again to see if there's a distinction between positive responses and negative responses and why. So that is a potential outcome, actually.
Okay. Thank you, Avinash. So before we conclude, maybe we should also extract a promise from you that you'll come back here and share results of your further research in a few months' time. And I thank General Narasimhan for his extensive participation. It was really nice to have listened to your insights, and all the other participants for joining us this afternoon. The link is available on YouTube for those of your contacts or people in your network you want to share with, please do share them around. And I'll bring this to a close. Surbhi, any other announcements to be made? No.
No. Thank you, Santosh. And my email is there with everyone. Again, if anyone has afterthoughts or later ideas or something that you read anytime in the future as well, on this topic, do share it with me. So yeah, next 3 months I'm going to be writing on this. So anytime is going to be useful. Again, thank you, Santosh and General Narasimhan and everyone else.
Thank you, Avinash. Thank you for joining us today. I know you have class now. It's a busy day. Thank you. And I hope you also get some time to enjoy the test match.
Yeah, I hope so too. Okay, bye-bye.